What are we gonna do? There's so many objects in the game. We have to optimize our project. What's up, everyone? John here. So, if you're dealing with a project that uses a lot of destroying and creating, and you have a lot of objects, one thing you could do to help with the performance of that is to use something called object pooling. And with object pooling, what you do is, instead of destroying and creating, you start with a bunch of objects up front, and then you disable and activate them. And I'm going to show you how to do it. So, object pooling is great for optimizing your project for two reasons. One, because an object is already being referenced in the scene, it prevents the computer from needing to allocate more memory. And two, if you no longer need the object, because it's being referenced already, and you're disabling and activating it, it limits the amount of garbage collection that the computer needs to do. So to start things off, you want to create a script called object pooling. And this will be the script that you're going to want to attach to an object in your scene. And then within that object pooling script, we're going to rely on a serialized object that we can reference. So what this allows us to do is to have a custom class that can be seen in the inspector in Unity. And I'll show you when the tutorial is finished. We're going to call this pool object. And with this pool object, we're going to want a name. We're going to want the ability to drop on a prefab, which we're going to be cloning. And then this array will indicate how many objects we want in the scene at once. So with this pool object, we want to be able to get the pool object from the object pool itself, and then we also want to be able to release the pool object from the object pool. So we're just going to want to loop through the objects array and return a inactive game object. So if the object is inactive, let's return it and then set it to active. And if we can't find anything, we'll just return null. And then the other very important function is to release it or deactivate it. And you just simply want to just pass in a game object for this. And we're going to check to see, does this game object exist? And if it does, this will basically turn it off. So now that we have our pool object custom script, what we want is our object pooling script to have an array of these objects, and then we want static functions to be able to call whenever or wherever in our scene. We'll have a get static function and a release static function. And then at the beginning of a scene, we're going to create the pool. So here, what we're going to want is a list of pool objects to reference. And the reason I'm serializing this list is so we have access to it in the inspector in Unity. And we want a static instance or a static reference to this script so we can then make static functions. And we can make this reference in the awake, so it's before everything. And then this is where we're gonna, at the start of the game or the start of your scene, we're gonna call this function called create pool. And what this will do is it'll loop through all these pool objects, and it'll create clones of all the prefabs, so we have access to them. So here we're gonna loop through it right now. And now we're going to loop through the pool objects, so if we didn't reference or we didn't assign the object to the objects array, we're going to instantiate the clone. And this will all make sense once we see it in action in the Unity scene. And then this is very important. You want to name the game object that you just created or was already in the scene to the name of the pool object's name, so we can easily reference it. And then we want to turn it off, or we want to deactivate the object right away. So just like the get function in the pool object custom script, we're going to do a get function, but it's a static function within the main object pooling script. So what this will allow you to do is you could type in object_pooling.get, type in the name of the pool object you want, and it will return the game object from any script. And here we're going to do a little bit of link here, and we're just going to try to find the name of the pool object based on name. Doesn't equal null, we're going to return it. And this is where we're calling the get function from the pool object. And then here we're just going to put a warning if it can't find it. Oh, you're going to need to return null by default in case it can't find it. And then here we're going to write our static release function that essentially deactivates a game object. We're going to do the same find as the other function, but we're going to do it based on the game object that you're passing in. And that's why the naming is important here. So if you're looking for, say, a blue cube, you pass in the game object. If that blue cube exists inside the pool object's, clone array, it'll find it and then deactivate it. And I'll show you how this works once we're finished writing the scripts. So here, if we found it, we're going to release it or deactivate it. Else, we're just going to return a warning. Okay, so to see your object pooling script in action, I'm going to make a simple script called ship, and when you click a mouse button, it's going to fire a missile or create a cube or something like that. So here in the update function, I'm going to go if input.getMouseButton down. We're going to call static function object pooling dot get, and I haven't added anything to the object pooling script yet, but for now we're just going to name this let's just say missile, and close it out. And because we're returning a game object, let's reference it here. So we're going to do like game object missile equals this if it exists. So if missile exists, we're going to do missile transform. So the missile's transform position is going to equal our ship's position. And then there'll be a script on the missile that just causes it to go forward. Then I'm just going to make a simple script called missile that just moves the missile up, and when it reaches a certain position, it will deactivate and go back into the object pool. So in the update function, we're just going to simply do transform.translate random speed of 5. I attached a object pooling script to this little game object, and now I'm just going to simply add some or change the array size. So let's say we're going to do one pool object. We're going to call it missile because it's going to be this. It's going to reference the same name in the get, and then the prefab will just be this random rocket. So I'm going to use this rocket. The missile script is already attached. Move this. And what I'm going to do is this missile is going to be the prefab. And I want about 5 missiles to be there initially. So I'm going to save it, hit play, and every time I click the mouse, it's gonna activate one of these rockets. When I click the mouse, a missile will launch, and when it hits the top, nothing will happen. It'll just keep launching a missile, and the missile just keeps going forever. So what we're going to do is when the missile hits the top, it's going to release or deactivate and go back into the pool. So if you open your missile script again, this simple check will deactivate the missile when it reaches the top. So if the y vector is greater than, say, 8, let's deactivate the missile. So we'll do object pooling dot release, and then just simply pass in the game object. So that would be transform dot game object. When you run your project and you click a missile, the missile will hit here and then it'll deactivate. Goes to the top, boop, deactivate. See how it activates and then deactivate. So if I click more than once, deactivate. So every time it keeps releasing and it keeps activating, deactivating. And you notice that if I can spam click right now, it'll only activate how many I had at once. So because I only had 5, it'll only ever go to 5. And if I click again and there isn't a deactivated object, nothing will happen. So it's always looking for a deactivated object to reference. So real quick, let's say you don't want the clones to be created at runtime. You want to have this already, generated before your scene loads. So what you could do is you can grab this prefab, drag it into the scene, and maybe I'm going to copy it, let's say 4 times. Now what I can do is I can drag and drop those prefabs or those clones into my array. I'll change this to say 4 instead. So now this will not actually create a clone at runtime because it's already being in the scene. So when you turn on the scene, it'll turn all these off and then activate them when needed. So let me show you. So all missiles are off. I click and it turns them on and turns them off. So there's 2 ways you can do this. You can either assign them from your scene like that, or you can just create an empty array with a size, and it'll automatically do it at runtime. So it's really up to you. If you have any questions or comments about object pooling, please put a comment down below. And if you like this kind of content, please subscribe or hit that notification bell. Thanks for checking this out, and have a good one.